exciting times in the Agile Government Center because we're starting to see people coming to us with problems that can be solved in an agile way. I'm looking forward to working with Chris Mem, who's on the line, who's doing some work in dealing with disasters. I'm looking forward to working with Nancy Augustine, who's doing work that looks at how we rethink and reconfigure the social service network along the way. So we've grown from the point at which we described what it was, what Agile government was, to the point where we articulated principles, to the point where we're beginning to apply those principles. Coming in December for our fourth quarterly meeting will be a report from the Agile Government Center with the help of Dan Chinook and the folks at IBM that looks at the future of Agile government. What is going to happen next as far as we can tell? We'd love to have any stories. I'm going to debrief Terry Gerton on a wonderful story about the Defense Department, the Labor Department, and veterans unemployment. I'm going to do that in the next week or so. We have about 10 or 12 good stories. We thank the folks at the Treasury for the work that they did. We thank Sally Yeager for the work that she did. But we were always looking for more stories. The story is simply a tale about how governments effectively used techniques that are based on Agile principles. They involve customers. They created networks. They innovated. They looked at the nature of the evidence before them and the metrics that were needed. Things like that are Agile in and of themselves. So with that request for more stories, just send them to me, gedesev@gmail.com. You can get it on, I believe you can get it on the website. Thank you very much, and I'll turn it back over to you, Joe.
Great, thank you, Ed. Yeah, and definitely we want to hear from all of you in terms of your stories, your questions, your comments. So please send those to us. And so Dan Chinook is the Executive Director of the IBM Center for the Business of Government and is our partner with the Agile Government Center. And I wanted to ask Dan for any opening remarks that you had.
Thanks, Joe, and it's great to see everybody for another meeting of the network. And just a few points in addition to Ed's report that's coming up probably in December. We will also, I'm going to preview one of the speakers for today. We've got a report coming up in a couple of weeks from Inez Markle. I'm sure she'll talk about it in her remarks as well on human centricity in digital delivery and as a way to enhance Agile government. And that'll be some terrific work that Inez has led. We're also working for folks that may be interested. Ed mentioned Chris Mim. This is a project working on with the Academy around understanding how to help governments build capacity, such as agility, to address increasingly frequent shocks. And one need only look at the events of the past weekend in Puerto Rico and all of the different increasing in severity and periodicity events during hurricane seasons to understand that discipline is necessary across a range of different topics. And Agile, working with Ed, will be front and center as we develop sort of recommendations for governments, both in the US and around the world, to do this work. We're actually working with governments in Australia. We're working with the OECD. I don't know if our friends from OECD are on the call yet, but they're very interested in this as well. So just continuing to show that we're taking lessons from discussions like this and putting them into research actionable recommendations that government leaders can take and move forward with. Thanks, Joe. Back over to you.
Great, thanks, Dan. Okay, so I'd like to welcome our panelists, Martha Doris, Carolyn Lukensmeyer, and Inez Merkel to come to the virtual stage for our conversation. Again, we'll be talking about customer experience, human-centered design, and trust. Each of them is an expert in one of those topics, but we'll also be talking about the interconnection between those, and in particular, the connection to Agile government. So I wanted to thank you all for your time today and your insights. And first, I'd just like to ask each of you to tell us just briefly a little bit about who you are, and in particular, what got you interested in the topic that you'll be focusing on today. So Carolyn, I'll start with you.
Thanks very much, Joe, and I'm delighted to be with part of this panel and with you all. My background academically is in organization design, and I specialized in how do you put together strategy, structure, and human resources so that the system actually works. I was honored to be selected as the governor of Ohio's chief of staff in the late 80s. which gave me an opportunity to actually innovate and experiment on this issue of how do you both engage employees, how do you engage customers and citizens to actually produce programming which people feel more ownership of. And after that experience, I was invited to come to DC by Al Gore to work on reinventing government, which is where I actually met many of you who are on this Zoom today. And my territory in that work was once again how to deal with engagement for decision making and how to create cross-agency structures, things like the CIO, the CFO, the CMO panels that could make agencies more agile at actually carrying a similar target across the federal government. Trust is the center of where all of this work has to come to. And frankly, I left the administration quite early to start America Speaks because it was clear to me that we didn't have meaningful structures for bringing citizens into policymaking, which essentially is the essence of the self-governance of our system. So in 1995, I created America Speaks, ran it for 18 years. We did amazing projects after 9/11 in New York and New Orleans with Katrina and the flooding. And then I was the founding executive director of the National Institute for Civil Discourse, right at that moment when we began not even to trust each other to be able to talk together across our differences. Delighted to be here.
Thank you, Carolyn. So it sounds like one key lesson I just learned is that you were doing Agile before we called it Agile. So thank you for paving the way for us. Inez, over to you.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. I'm joining you from Germany. I'm a professor here now at the University of Constance, and I study how governments are actually implementing Agile. And I do this in different countries all around the world. Started with 18F and USDS in the US, of course, and then went over to GDS in England and Italy and so on. And one of the aspects that I was really interested in was how these new roles like human-centered designers are coming into government. How are they embedded in there? How can we now make sure that they are no longer just doing their stuff in this little innovation pockets, protected for a little while and then disappear, or in innovation labs, for example. But how can we move all these new work practices into the administrative routines, or make those routines more dynamic over time? And one of the things that was really eye-opening actually came from a student, an ex-ed student of mine, who said, we don't even know how to design things. We have our forms. When we do this in analog ways, we just know which part of the form we are not filling out because no one knows what to do with that. But now what we're seeing with the so-called digital transformation is that things are just simply moved from analog to digital, including all those mistakes and forms. And so if you're forcing those forms and people have to fill it out, obviously it doesn't work. So taking on the user perspective in-house, but also obviously external with external users is really interesting to me. And I can talk a bit about how we can introduce human-centered design in government.
Wonderful. Thank you. I look forward to hearing more about the user-centered approaches, which is directly related to customer experience that Martha is going to talk about. So Martha, over to you to introduce yourself and your background. In your own mute, Martha.
Got to be the one. Martha Doris, and I spent 34 years at the General Services Administration, where over that time, I actually represented the U.S. to many international forums around e-government, digital government, and government online, and saw countries around the world really focusing on the citizen and how they deliver services. And the U.S. was sort of just nibbling around the edges at that point. And so I also ran the Office of Citizen Services for like 12 years, where we ran, the portal USA.gov and the contact center to provide information directly to the public. But we also created a lot of products and services to help other agencies to improve the way they delivered services to their customers. And at a point, we had a website called howto.gov, and the tagline was helping agencies improve the customer experience. And up until that point, we'd focused on customer service, and I started digging into customer experience as opposed to customer service. And the whole world just opened up to me, and the importance of this holistic view of the way you understand your customers, put customers at the center of your programs. And so when I retired from GSA about 7 years ago, I created a company to really focus on helping agencies, helping companies, working through all the good government nonprofit organizations to plant the customer experience seeds, how-tos, and move this along. And I'm delighted to say we now have a president's management agenda, an executive order, and laws around customer experience. So it's a pleasure to be here with Carolyn and Inez, and I look forward to the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Martha. You've obviously planted a lot of seeds. There's been a lot of progress with customer experience over the past few years. So I see the connection between these three topics, but I'd love to, before we start drilling down into individual topics, to get your perspective, each of you, in terms of how you see the topics of trust, customer experience, and human-centered design related to one another. So Carolyn, I'd like to start with you on that.
Well, fundamentally, if I'm interacting with an institution, whether or not I trust that institution has all to do with whether I believe that institution is listening to me, i.e. human-centered design, and whether or not I believe that institution understands my experience, i.e. everything Martha's going to talk about. So to me, these are so intricately interwoven that I'm sure as we talk, we will each actually be saying things related to the other person's experience.
Great. Yeah, I think that those are really good insights about people listening to you and focusing on you. Martha, what's your sense of that?
Well, I see customer experience as really an umbrella that covers a lot of different disciplines around data and human-centered design and performance measures and governance and strategy and so on. And so, I look at the way that you put your customer at the center and design the services with them in mind, as part of your organization, and to build trust in government. I think that, Carolyn said it well. The more you get the services that are reliable, consistent, quality services, that you just increase your trust in that organization and in that program and in the organization that you're interacting with.
Right. Inez, what's your sense of that?
Yeah, so I'm starting with the practice of humans being human-centric and having that kind of mindset that you're even allowing other information to be introduced into your own hypotheses or the way that you are thinking about a service. And if we, as an academic, obviously I go back to Max Weber, and the way that bureaucracies originally were designed was that we made bureaucrats professionals, that they have all the power, they know how to design these things. And from there on, we also were shielding them from the public very much. And anytime something goes public, then it's usually negative. And you always hear civil servants say, well, I can't design a unicorn and have everyone have their opinion and then design services for everyone's needs. But what human-centered design is at the core is to understand that we as civil servants don't have all the knowledge about what the users actually need or what different types of users need. So it's that kind of mindset to open yourself up to that and understand that you don't have all the answers. And then it's a set of work practices on how you actually implement that and how you go about reaching out to potential users, understanding that your original idea might might not be what the users actually need. And unfortunately, there's relatively little empirical research to understand, is this way of designing just from the internal logic of government the right way to do it, or is the more human-centric way the better way? Because we've never really done anything that went in parallel. But we know that when users have a say, then the service can be improved while we are designing it. And so we are taking out lots of those errors that are made when you're just clicking on publish. We've seen that obviously with healthcare.gov that it then didn't work and people couldn't get access to the service. So we're trying to move lots of those errors into the process, into the design process, into earlier stages, learn as we go, iterate, and then have a much better product, hopefully at the end. And so then the premise is, and for me, trust is then a potential outcome, that people feel they are getting access, the service is delivered to them, or while they are working through it, through a website, they're more satisfied because they get the access. And then hopefully by extension, it also then generally increases trust into government operations. It's a theoretical argument, obviously. There are lots of different factors. The political flavor of the day obviously plays a huge role as well. But that would be, from my academic point of view, that would be the kind of the line of argumentation.
Great. Well, thank you all. I think that's a really good framing. So we can now kind of talk about some of these individual topics, but I really did want to get your perspectives from the beginning about the connections. I also would ask our audience, and I put this in the chat too, if you have questions of our panelists as we go through the conversation, please just put those in the chat. We will get through as many of those as we can. So please, as you're thinking about them, just add that into the chat, and we'll address as many as we can. So we've had some overall framing, and then I'd like to focus on these three individual topics a little bit more, and then I want to get the panel's perspective in terms of some practical advice that you'd give to administrators. So Martha, I think I'll start with you in terms of, you've had experience at GSA and in your consulting role. So what have you seen in your experience and in terms of really the role of the customer experience in improving people's satisfaction and trust in government? What have you seen about that?
Well, thanks, Joe. I'm going to start with like a just level setting. What is customer experience? And it's really the perception that your customers have when interacting with any part of your organization. So that's why when I said it's so holistic, if you're talking to somebody within an agency, if you call them on the phone, if you go on the website, even, employee to employee, all of those interactions that you have with an agency impact the perception and how you feel about the organization that you've just conducted business with, hence the trust issue as well. And so providing, reliable, consistent, simple, secure government services really does demonstrate and improves the way that the citizens, feel about government. It's also, we have a couple of examples of the way focusing on customers can improve the trust. I mean, the VA has improved the veterans' trust in the VA by 24% over the last 5 years, based on their focus on veterans, families, survivors, and caregivers. And so you can see where there's a real impact when you put that kind of focus. It also, in the private sector, they looked at customer experience around loyalty and revenue, and we really look at it across the government as improving the lives of the people that you're providing services for. Really, increasing employee engagement, efficiency. It's actually more cost effective to answer the question the first time they contact you than it is to have them calling you back 5 times. So it is more efficient to start with the customer and work your way backwards. And it's really about excellence in mission delivery at the bottom line. So it's not just making people feel good about the services that they get. It's the how you deliver the services that your organization delivers. So I think we'll stop there. And
yeah, I like that the practical example too of the 20+% improvement at the VA in trust, just based on what they've been doing with the customer experience. So that, that focus on trust, Carolyn, leads to a question for you. It's certainly broader than just at one department, but just in general, how concerned are you about the lack of trust in government right now? And given your years of civic engagement work, what can you think that we can do about that?
Well, Joe, I have to say, I'm sure that everyone on this Zoom call would have your own way of saying this. But clearly within the last 5 or 6 years, and made dramatically a poignant moment on January 6th, we're now dealing not just with issues of trust in government relative to our capacity to listen to people, take their experiences seriously, and improve services. We're sitting in a country in which at least 30-some million people have stopped believing in or trusting the election system. So we're at a stage of an existential threat to our democratic foundations on the issue of trust. And I believe all that we're going to talk about today about government and government services is essential to helping to deal with this, but it's also essential that every single American can come to the place, number one, that they have access to vote, that they're able to vote, and that they believe their vote will be registered as they marked the ballot or pulled the lever. So I can't say how serious I believe this issue is in our country right now.
Yeah, I think you're speaking for most of us here on that topic. So Inez, in terms of the human-centered design.
But before you shift,
yes.
There was a second way that I think is important, because the way I'm speaking is a very sobering, somber piece, but there actually are things that are happening today that will improve trust. So this isn't a completely bleak picture by any means. So can I take a minute to give a few of those concrete examples?
Yes, please.
One of the biggest challenges is the huge gap between our national narrative, both by traditional media and social media, which feeds us constantly how divided we are and how much we cannot trust each other, let alone the government. And what I was privileged to see over 30 years working with America Speaks and with the National Institute, when you get down into the community level, things are not as bad as they look from the national perspective. Well over 70% of us know that where we are is wrong and want to do something about it and are looking for help from their institutions, government, faith-based, schools, to actually do something to re-knit the fabric of trust between ourselves as citizens and between us and our government. I'm just going to give a couple of examples. At NICD, in 15 months after the 2016 election, we actually worked in all 50 states and had something above 60,000 Americans who started feeling like there was no possibility of coming to see the cross the divide. And in 95% of the cases, once there was a structure, once there was a process, which is what human-centered design does wherever you apply it, they quickly discovered they had more in common than separated them. And yes, they may not yet still today agree on should we build the wall or shouldn't we build the wall on these very hot button issues, but they stopped demonizing each other for having a different point of view. Now, if I drop it more into the government services and can just give one example, I would pick Evanston, Illinois, as a city that has looked at this issue of the customer experience, of the inequity, racial justice issues, and has redesigned how city government works, all the way to having chosen to allocate a significant portion of the city's budget for reparations to what happened to African-American families in that community 80, 100 years ago. So as a city that's looked at it from our traditional customer services all the way to one of the most difficult issues in our culture in terms of where we still are on the issues of racial injustice, I would highlight Evanston, Illinois as a place to really take a look at what they've done.
Great. Yeah, and we've had the mayor of Evanston on for different panel conversations, and it's really been very enlightening and what all they have done. And I think that what you're highlighting is like on the one hand, people are divided, but they're not always as divided as they think. You don't have to demonize other people, and also when you get to the local level, a lot of times that's where you can really make a lot of these changes. And people are embedded in their communities, and they can buy into those changes there. So Inez, within this context of, we've talked about the overall the customer experience, we talked about the trust context. Where does human-centered design fit here? Where have you seen, how have you seen that being addressed and implemented in government? And how might that increase trust and accountability?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is a tough act to follow after Caroline made those statements. But I want to distinguish two things. So I think the political participation piece is one thing where it's really about community, about bringing all the voices to the table, increasing diversity. And there are obviously lots of parallels to what then an agency does in-house for their own, say, citizen services, if we want to digitally transform them, or just rethink how we have set them up. Is it still state of the art? What do we need in-house in terms of, the data needs that different departments potentially have, and so on. So where I have seen this, or where I study these things, as I said, are those innovation pockets. I still call them that because it's still not mainstream. And so what I see a lot is that these things are happening in innovation labs and digital labs. The innovation fellows, like the presidential innovation fellows, are coming in from completely different sectors with their competencies and practices, and are trying to bring those in short term, maybe for 3 or 6 months, and then work in tandems with civil servants. And so they are bringing these new competencies in, but then they are obviously also leaving and going back to much higher paying jobs outside of government. And what I've seen, and so we've done interviews with 150 innovation fellows and their tandem partners in government, but also with people who are creating innovation labs and so on. And what we've extracted are 5 different phases where users and different types of users, can be companies, can be nonprofits, or individual citizens are involved. And generally this is, I think the co-design piece is where, I think at Caroline's stage, there's a lot of co-planning going on, where initially we want to just hear what are different groups actually, what are their needs. But then the co-design is more intricate, where you're actually starting to make sense of the different inputs that you get. And then you start the co-development, where again, different groups come in, like your IT service provider comes in, consultants and so on, who actually develop potentially a prototype, and they test it then again with users. And then we have the co-delivery, where users are also involved, giving early feedback, and then ongoing as the product or the digital services online, then you see a lot of co-assessment just naturally going on, where people give you feedback and so on. So there are different ways on including users at different stages of the process. The problem that I still see is, as I said, this is usually, you can make it part of your procurement process. That's already really advanced then, but we see a lot of full pieces there, and especially in-house, we see lots of resistance, where people still say things like, well, these kids in shorts, yeah, well, if they want to do it that way, I keep doing it my way. And we really see a threat to the self-efficacy of middle managers, who were usually the ones who were making the decisions. So this giving away the decision power to an unknown group of users who are now supposedly the experts is really, really tough for civil servants who were hired for that, who went up the ladder. I'm sorry if I'm offending anyone, but those were the results that we heard empirically from the interviews that we've done.
No, I think that's great to hear that, just the facts in terms of the results of your empirical work. I'm hearing a lot of, human-centered design being co-led, co-designed, co-implemented. And that's clearly a challenge for a lot of people inside any organization, public or private. So we're all public administration types. I do want to make sure we get to kind of the practical advice. I think we've gone through what do we mean by these concepts. But now it's kind of like, how do we put this into practice in the public sector? And so wanted to kind of shift to that. And one thing, Martha, I know you and I have talked before about customer experience, what it means, what it doesn't mean, and the fact that it's different from customer service. Customer experience and customer service are different. So if I'm an administrator thinking about how to implement this, it seems like I need to understand, first of all, what is customer experience, what is customer service. So just kind of maybe help us level set, give advice to that administrator that's just trying to really figure out how they might implement this and what they could do.
Sure. I also want to respond a little bit to Inez's, study about the digital services in the public sector. And in the federal level, they do have, OPM has an innovation lab that they've been training teams of people, government people, to go into agencies. I do think that bringing in teams of people with a certain expertise, dropping them in an agency, having them shake it up and think that everybody's just going to jump on board with them is never going to work. And so, integrating and embedding them into organizations and helping the people that are already there so that when these people leave, that they've actually, educated and raise the expertise across the organization. I think these teams have done tremendous jobs in changing the dialogue and the thinking around bringing the users into the design process for sure. So I think there's definitely a lot to learn from what's happened over the past 10 years in these digital services teams. When you think of it actually translates nicely into your question, which is digital services teams usually look at user experience, not customer experience. And so that ties into the customer service. So when you think of customer experience, you're really looking at the end-to-end journey from the time somebody has a problem. The public needs to get information about COVID-19 and they need to know, what are the symptoms? Where do you get a vaccine? Are the vaccines safe? How does it impact my, small business? What about my rent? All these different questions. There's 2,800 web pages across the federal government with COVID-19 information on them. And so where do they go? Then all the way into, are we through with the pandemic, or, what's the next step? So all of those things, this end-to-end journey, understanding your customers, agencies having a strategy on how they are, what is the vision that they want for their customers, and what's the blueprint and the roadmap for how they get to that vision that they're looking at. How do we measure it? How do we continue to understand the improvements that are being made? Design is a critical part of it as well. Also the culture of an organization. So it touches every person in the government. It also pulls in employee experience. If you don't have the right culture and the right empowerment of your employees, then you can't really turn around and expect them to deliver better services or experience to their customers. Customer service is when I have a question and I call this 1-800 number and I pick up the phone and I call, do they answer my question? Did they pick up the phone? Was it the right answer? And so that touch point, that single touch point is really customer experience, customer service, but it's also user experiences. What was that experience when I was interacting with that specific channel or product? And one story that seems to be the best resonating with people is, I'll try to do it really quickly, is the Under Armour story where a friend of mine ordered 4 pair of shorts from Under Armour on a mobile app. Technology was great. Mobile app was great. They got the shorts, they didn't fit. One pair fit, so they took the 3 other ones back to the storefront. They couldn't exchange them because those channels weren't connected on the back end. So it's like one channel was great, then you go back to return them. They ended up taking them back and they rebought from the store, but they had to make many, many, many phone calls between the store, the brick and mortar, and the online store in order to make sure that they got their credit back, because weeks later they hadn't received a credit. So their overall experience was not very good after that interaction with Under Armour. And it's the same thing in the government. If you go online, you look for some information and then you can't find it and you call, if you're not getting the same information across these channels, and you don't have to start all over again by giving your information all over again. They know what transactions that you've already undertaken with that organization. It just makes for a better overall experience. So that's sort of how, the umbrella, that's why I see it so much as an umbrella, and I think a factor in almost resistance because it's so ambiguous because it covers so much.
Yeah, you got to think very holistically and make that distinction between the point in time customer service and the overall experience and design for the experience. So I know you've been doing research on this human-centered design, but what have we learned that administrators should be thinking about as they incorporate human-centered design into the design and implementation of public programs?
Yeah, so we've learned tons. I've already made a few shortcuts here where I talked about the self-efficacy of managers, that they need to understand that they actually have to live it themselves and not just nod along and say, yeah, we are implementing this, you guys implement it and just let me know what you need. But then they don't actually live it themselves, so the rest of the organization won't do it either. So what I think is this understanding that it's a true mindset shift, and that they actually have to role model it for their own organization. And that's easy to do or easy to say if you're hiring designers and let them do their work, but then you also have to stand behind their decisions that they are preparing, right? And elevate them and provide the political cover. But also they can take very simple steps themselves and make their own organization or their own team more human-centered by, for example, including people already in the agenda setting for the next team meeting, or, not being just because of your status or the role in the organization, you're not necessarily always have to be the one who's only talking at meetings, but be more inclusive in the way that you're designing those meetings. And then using all those methods, obviously, like design thinking and so on, to solve your own internal, very complex problems with those methods so that you can see they're working. I think it has to be modeled and people have to feel it themselves. Otherwise, they won't trust the process. And later on, if they then have to sign off on that with their own teams doing this. I think one piece of advice is also that they should practice visual management in the way that they have their own Kanban boards, for example, and have their meetings in front of those boards where they show, this is where we're working on, and here I have problems, or I'm stuck here as a leader. Actually admitting this is part of also the design process, that you need to hear different voices and open the space for that, because usually, you're supposed to have all the answers, but you don't. And so showing your team that you are making mistakes and that you don't have all the answers is a great way of allowing them to have a conversation about this. And then also showing that there is a different error culture that is more open to admitting those failures potentially. And then obviously allow your teams to be trained in this. Martha said there is at OPM an innovation lab that does that, but I think we need this hybrid way of doing this, right? We need to obviously bring in people who already know this, are trained elsewhere. We have to train the existing staff, but especially leadership, and to come from it from both sides, kind of. And then by extension, we also need to really work on public affairs curriculum in all the great schools in the US. I was part of that for 14 years, so I understand what the pressures are to publish, but then also we need to really think about curriculum revisions and changes that we can make so that people don't come in and say, I'm trained this way and we're doing this and I have that expectation, but they are coming in and saying, I know another way and let's try that. And, have that ground prepared so that these people can actually work in different ways.
Yes, I think what I'm hearing is really leaders that are actually leading in a very different way than a lot of our traditional kind of styles of leadership. And you've got to be able to do that in order to really incorporate and maximize, human-centered design. So speaking of leadership, Carolyn, I wanted to talk to you kind of transitioning in terms of, we've talked about the polarized times that we've lived in, are living in, and the challenges that the public sector is facing. So from a leadership standpoint, especially, what actions have you seen public administrators take to, more closely connect with the public and build mutual trust?
Thank you, Joe. And before I respond directly to your question, I think there's an important word or concept that we haven't really highlighted yet in this discussion, even though we've all given examples. And that is that this is about governance. This is about who's making decisions. And both Martha and Inez have given examples about where the tensions inside an agency are likely to increase. So one of my piece of advice in public administration settings is you need to take a look at this inside your agency in terms of human-centered design and who's influencing what decisions and how are people listened to before you try to ask all those managers, particularly people that are running programs, to learn how to do this with the public. So do a real audit of how this would operate inside your own agency. And then well, frankly, and we all know this in Napa, but it's much easier to do this at the local level and the state level. It's not easy anyplace, but it is much easier to do it at the local level and the state level than it is at the federal level. And part of that is because in the federal government, we are more removed from the everyday lived experience of the people we serve than is true at the state level or at the local level, where particularly at the local level, I'm going to see you in the grocery store, I'm going to see you at church. So we are paying attention to our relationship with people in many settings besides the setting in which we might want to engage people differently. One system that actually started in Latin America, I think this is probably the model or method that has been most widely adapted in government agencies in the US about real citizen engagement to build trust as well as shift resources, is participatory budgeting. And the Participatory Budgeting Project has a great website. It started out being done in a certain amount of money in a particular geography in New York City, for example. Now some cities, and frankly at America Speaks, we kind of led this with Mayor Williams in Washington, D.C., where the entire city budget had an engagement process in which people could impact what they felt were the most significant priorities. And eventually, the way you want to weave this into the rest of the agency's management system, in DC, they got so sophisticated that the planning department developed software that once the budget amount was announced and the priorities were announced, the public could look at the same performance management measures that managers were being evaluated on that inside city government was operating. So the amount of transparency between the original decisions that the public influenced all the way to how is it being implemented and how can we keep track? And frankly, another important part of this that I'm not sure any one of the three of us have said yet. We want to do this often in human-centered design in a way that the public, the citizen, the customers have skin in the game as well. That to really change some of this experience, it's not just public managers that are going to behave differently. When I leave the interaction as a citizen, I'm going to understand that I'm going to do some different behaviors as well. And that begins to make this feel like a joint enterprise rather than something that is closely held inside an agency and I'm always on the outside knocking, trying to get in. Now, I could give lots more examples, Joe, and I'm happy to do that. But I know also that you want to go a couple steps further with those. So give me some guidance. If you'd like me to be a few more practical examples, I'm happy to do it.
I think that's great. I'm sure you have other practical examples that you can weave in as we get through a few more questions. But I think that's all really good. I will say we're going to cover some of the audience questions in a few minutes. So if you have additional, I know a couple have come in, please send those in. And then we'll talk kind of moving forward about the future of these efforts. But Before we get to the audience questions, I did just want to kind of circle back to Agile. So, we've been talking about trust, we've been talking about customer experience, talking about human-centered design, and I'd just love to get your sense a little bit more at a little deeper level about the connection of those to Agile based on the conversation. So Martha, I'll start with you.
I never follow directions, so I'm going to actually respond a little bit to Carolyn's comment about leadership. I think it's really important for people to know that there's at least a dozen agencies across the government, the federal government, that do have chief customer officers, chief experience officers, that both some focus on the internal services that they provide to their employees, like HR and mostly the CIO's office, but many in the organizations and agencies that are doing services to external customers, and agencies that are the high impact service providers that are designated through OMB. There's 35 of them. They're required to have a leader who pays attention to the services that they're providing under that HISP. So we are making progress on creating a focus and leadership and embedding it into the way that the government does business across customer experience, but particularly in design. Almost everything that you see will say services need to be designed with, or design the service. So they're definitely integrating all of these concepts, including design, into everything. And Agile is just to me, it's just a way, and as talked about it early on, you develop a MVP, you test it out, you try it, you learn from it. I'm not a person that believes in fail fast and fail forward. I believe in learn fast and, lean in, right? So I think that's part of the government problem, is feeling like this failure word gets in the way of trying things if it doesn't work. So, I think even the VA's created an institute within the VA to teach human-centered design. So agencies are really bringing people in, having their own digital services teams, but also training internally as well.
Great. Yeah, I know the whole fail fast thing doesn't really resonate inside government, given so many of the missions that, you just really can't fail. People don't want to hear that. So Inez, what's your sense of, based on the conversation, really bringing this back to Agile?
Yeah, so to me, Agile is something different than just the fail fast idea. Iteration and learning from those failures, experiments that you're doing. I don't call them failures necessarily, but you see very early on is what we have designed. Is that really what the users need? Because you have them as part of the process, and yeah, you can call that it's a failure, but really it's, you're moving through the process and you're learning as you go, and you're learning faster than you do. And instead of designing the whole thing, have your switch on day, and then you learn that there's a failure, that the thing doesn't actually work. So for me, Agile is a much larger umbrella concept, and under this umbrella, you have lots of different frameworks that are usually coming from the software industry. Among them, one of them is human-centered design, and tons of others. And what I like to talk about is really on the work practice level. So, and for each of the concepts that you're applying, or those frameworks, you have to be very, very clean in how you execute them. Otherwise, nothing comes out at the end. And I think that's a real challenge oftentimes in government, because the pressures, the teams don't really have the time to work through those agile cycles, because then all of a sudden, at least that's what I just heard in one of the interviews, a parliamentarian sends an email at 1 a.m. at night and wants your response by 10 a.m. So you can't do your stand-up meeting at 9 and then start your workday in an agile team, because you are pulled away, and you have that ongoing ambidexterity, right? You want to implement a very clean agile process and work together with your team through all the motions and the practices that you have tried or that are really prescribed in the frameworks. But then the reality is you're pulled away, and I've just went through a coaching training, and people, those trainers tell you, leaders need to understand, if you're pulling people away because whatever a politician or the head of your agency thinks it's more important to get information in that moment, right at that moment. You also need to understand that you have to give something back to the team. So you have to replace that manpower that you're pulling out, and you're destroying kind of the collaborative culture of the teams that you're trying to create. So I think we need to make that point that there is one way that government organizations are working and what the expectations are. And then if we're introducing in parallel agile teams, it's really, really tough for them to be finding that protected space, and then bringing those two worlds back together is really tough. And that's what I meant earlier when I said, we haven't really made that integration piece, and we're struggling with the left and the right side of the brain. So the exploitation of what we do really well and the best practices that are in place, so administrative routines, and then the exploration part where we're trying to experiment, we're trying to have those teams who are learning to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes and have a different way of interacting than also potentially with the users, which is not necessarily needed when you have best practices in place on the other side. So I think that's a really, really tough spot to be in. I think we are in the middle of that somehow, and lots of those practices are then adapted to the context. But when we are then starting to see things like, instead of doing daily meetings at 9 for just 5 minutes, when people then, civil servants, then say, oh, can't we just do that every 3 weeks instead of daily? Then your framework is gone, and it's no longer that pure process that you're trying to bring into the organization. And when you earlier pointed to the leadership position, I think we need different types of leaders, like those that are practicing shared leadership and understand that they are not the final decision makers. And it's a very, very unsettling process to get to that kind of mind as well.
Yeah, I think you're highlighting a lot of the challenges with kind of putting agile teams and agile practices into very traditional, bureaucratic institutions. So Carolyn, over to you. Before we have a couple of questions in the chat and any others that come in, just around your sense of agile and the role of that.
Well, I think Inez just did a great job of describing the complexity that is involved in moving from these specific processes to an agency being able to live in an agile system. I'm going to try to say something very simply, that in the end, if you have an agency that is operating in the agile framework on all levels, it means that the agency has a capacity to adapt to both internal change and external change at a rate of speed that has not been typical of bureaucratic organizations. And it does require a different kind of leadership. It does require more flexibility in terms of adapting process to new information. And it particularly, I think, in large federal agencies where you're bringing in the new customer experience team, who actually other teams in the agency feel like that was part of what they were doing before. So you've got all this unlearning and relearning to do to meld the new capacities into the existing capacities. So that's what I would add to an already rich comment by Martha and by Ines.
Great. Yeah, I think that those are really, really good points. So there are a couple of questions that came in through the chat. Martha, maybe I turn this one over to you. The focus was like, how could people be given a portal where they could rate federal agency services that they experience? And the comment is, could performance.gov be that place where people could be invited to rate, critique, offer their redesign or delivery improvement suggestions? So how do we do this? How do we get the information, give people the opportunity to provide their sense of the services that they're receiving? And you're on mute, Martha, sorry.
So I think the vision for performance.gov is to be a place where, as agencies get feedback on the services that they provide, that they will go automatically into a dashboard on performance.gov. I think they've taken an incremental agile approach to creating it, right? They created some agencies couldn't even make the input that they received public because of PRA rules. So then if they got another kind of waiver for making their feedback public, there is a lot of feedback on performance.gov by agency and by HISP. And I understand and really do agree that it would be nice to see a lot of this feedback all in one place. They've also been trying to create a common framework for the kind of questions and the kind of feedback that you get so that you can compare them across agencies. And that just takes longer than, we want it to take to get to the place where you have a single place where you can look at all the services. I'm actually more interested in a single place where the actual service levels are transparent. So how many days does it take to process this? How long does it take to answer the phone? And those kind of things. So I think we have a ways to go. I think we as much progress as we've made, we're still kind of moving in that direction. In terms of having a place where people are invited to rate, critique, and offer their redesign or delivery improvement suggestions, agencies are supposed to be doing that through that feedback mechanism. So that's something we can pass along to OMB and see what their plans are. I think the other question that we have here, which is what incentive does the public sector have for being human-centered? The private sector has the incentive of attraction and retention of customers. The public sector users are captive. We get that question all the time about there's only one place to get your immigration work done, or there's only one place to pay your taxes. And the reality is, if you have an experience or a way to interact with that agency that you know they're transparent, you know where your information or your application is in the process, you know that you're being treated in a fair and equitable and inclusive way, that you can understand, and it's a simple to understand, like with census or with IRS and written in plain language, you're more likely to comply with things that the government wants you to do. So there's a lot of other reasons. The issue of loyalty and retention, or loyalty and revenue, does apply to the government, because there are many places in the government that actually charge for their services, either to the public or to other agencies, like GSA with their contracts. Agencies can go other places, so they need to apply these customer experience disciplines to provide a good experience to agencies so that they continue to use them.
Right. Yeah. And Inez, I was wondering if your research, have you focused on that, kind of the incentive that the public sector has for being human-centered?
I think Martha mentioned a lot of the real important points. It's that people don't get access to services, is I think, through administrative burdens that are put up, and that it can be simplified, obviously. I think that's one of the incentives. Sukumar has, interestingly enough, also done research on that, so it's interesting that he asked that question. Would like to hear his opinion on it. I think the other pieces are that, the core of it, the simplicity, we don't necessarily want people to come back all the time. And we know that there are studies, I think one study talks about that citizens only have 1.3 times per year they have interactions with government, others say 2.7 times. So we don't necessarily want them to come back. We want to also decrease the traffic, obviously. So routine users, that's not something that Lufthansa or Pepsi or whoever can do that, but we want to deliver that service once, and it should be reaching the user. The other thing is, there are so many other sector-specific things that are going on. I don't know if that's also true for the US, but in Europe, the government workforce, 30% will be retiring during the next few years. So at some point, we need to cash in on the digital transformation. I think there's no way around it. We need to automate some of those things. And that has to be done at the highest level of integrity, that people trust that the automated version is the same service they get to the one compared if they walk into an agency. And we need to make sure that we are not creating those breaks in those different channels that Martha was talking about earlier, right? So if they're starting the process online, or they're prompted to do it, maybe even proactively by government, but then they're breaking up because, you know, they can't fill in the fields because they don't have all the data that's necessary. So I think there are incentives that are external to government, that are just happening to the sector, but then also just internally the smooth working of actual delivery of services that needs to be on the highest level of performance. And all the political things we also talked about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And if there's one thing I've learned from, you know, years of studying public servants, I mean, there's that intrinsic motivation. People go into this field because they want to serve. And so if you can show them that this is a more effective, efficient, and equitable way of doing it, then many of them will be responsive to that, because that's why they went into public service to begin with. There's a question, Carolyn, I might kick this over to you, so because you've been doing a lot in public feedback over the years, and of course now we've got social media, you know, the internet, we've got all these bots. So as it's great to say we're going to reach out and we're going to get feedback, but how do we know that we're getting feedback from real people and that that's an accurate representation of the challenges or strengths of a particular idea? Like how do we navigate this new world we live in?
Brad, that is a huge question.
Right, I don't expect you to solve that in the next 10 minutes, but
actually, something that I think is most interesting on this question, and I just learned this yesterday. Casey Newton, who is kind of seen as the person to follow in terms of what's happening on our media platforms relative to these kind of questions, put out a report that Facebook is taking a new big experiment in governance in which they're actually bringing in the public to review their policies on moderation and when to actually let something stand and when to take it off the platform. So I think that is a huge step forward in terms of the recognition by the owners of the platforms that they too have to face up to the questions that Brad, you put so well. I think in part in the government services context, I think it is possible to ensure that you are designing public feedback which requires people to participate in a way that is not anonymous. And when what's the word I'm looking for? When you take that step, you can be pretty assured that you're actually getting clear messages that are connected to real people. The other piece, and I was very interested, given what I've done in citizen engagement for 30 years, the Facebook experiment very much did what we did at America Speaks, which we said, what's the demographic that we're interested in? i.e. the veterans customer services, who are we serving? And if we're going to get feedback, how do we identify people who represent that population? And that's who we want feedback from. So we actually identify the right demographic, which we then invite into the feedback process. And maybe this is said too generally, Brad, but I think the most important thing is that we're not relying on any of just the open platform processes for feedback on these important questions. We're taking responsibility to design, to identify who we're inviting into it, and to ensure that there is a line of integrity between the participants and the agency that's asking for the feedback. But I will actually send the link. I can't do it right while we're talking, but I'll send the link about this Facebook experiment to James, and I think you might all find it very interesting in terms of the importance of how much the platforms have taken over our sense of the ability to be in control, or at least have influence over our relationship with a larger public.
Great, and thank you, Carolyn. And Inez also noted that user-centered design really looks at observations of users who are trying to access a service and describe their journey. So it's not necessarily a lot of feedback points. So thank you, Inez, for that point. Anybody else has any other questions for our panelists, please go in and send those in. But I wanted to, in the last few minutes that we have here, just ask our panelists, looking out to the future, what's your biggest concern, and then what gives you the most hope around these topics? So Martha, I'll start with you.
I think my biggest concern is that we continue the momentum that we've gained in the last, year or so through the PMA and the executive order, and we've been successfully transitioning from one administration to another over the past 4 or 5 administrations, but we have an increased momentum and focus now that we'd like to sustain, hopefully in legislation, to ensure that agencies are really looking at the way they deliver services to the public, from the public or their customers' perspective. My greatest hope is that we have integrated this kind of thinking more and more into more and more people, and more organizations are paying attention to it, and that we will, we are making progress.
Mm-hmm. Great. Inez, concern and hope.
Yeah, so I want to connect this to something that was said earlier, that there is a real disconnect oftentimes between what we read in the news, what politicians also like us to think about how government operates, and then how the actual operation works. And I'm really concerned, and I haven't found a good answer to that. Why are government agencies not corresponding and communicating about their really good things that they're doing, that the website actually works, that this many people were served through it, that the service was designed in this way? And so I understand, of course, structurally why this is happening, but I think we need to have that power shift also at times. This is not about manipulating how the public sees us, but if negative things are popping up, then I think government also need to have a channel or a way of communicating positive interactions and things that they have done to mitigate risks and so on. What I am really concerned about is that we have this massive lack of digital and agile competency. So we talk a lot about this, and it then morphs into a real full agile application or practices that we see. What I would like to see more of, and we have a lack of, are government academies who are training people themselves and don't give all of this to the market. I think there's a real incentive not to do the things that are currently necessary in government. We are continuing to teach in a way that we have taught for decades, and I see also a huge push to go back to the times before COVID, because during COVID, things were possible. We always had that mandate to make things possible, because otherwise people die. We never really, this was a saying that we also used in public affairs schools, that, we have to be careful because otherwise people die, and it's a real important service that we're delivering. But now we had the situation where people actually died because of wrong decisions, because of services that we weren't able to deliver them because we didn't have the digital component ready in place and set up to go at times. So I see this huge pushback to go back into analog times, because the really important reason of the pandemic is apparently no longer there. On a more hopeful note, maybe that we also have those lighthouses of those really courageous leaders who are just pushing through, and they are waiting for pushback from the public, or it's mostly the Nike or Google kind of mentality, where we're just doing it and we see how it works, and then we're waiting for legal to call us back. So that makes me obviously hopeful that there are people who want to try different ways of delivering services, and that's great.
Pushing forward. Carolyn, what's your perspective on that? Biggest concern and biggest hope?
Well, I'll go back to the fundamental issue that I was asked to join this panel on, which is trust. And 2 resources that I think all public managers should be keeping track of is the issue of trust in democracy, beyond trust in our agency to do our work. And 2 resources that are great on that is the OECD's report, Building Trust to Reinforce Democracy, that came out in July this year. And the Pew Research Center most recently did this in 2019, so it must be updated. but their work on trust and distrust in America. So I think paying attention to where this stands. My biggest concern, there are three places that trust really matters in a democracy. We've been talking about trust in the institution, which is huge. Equally important is our trust in each other, which is the lowest that it's ever been recorded by Gallup. Has been doing this since the end of World War II. And we're now down to only 37% of us actually believe that we can trust each other to do what we say we will do. We know from being in an agency, if your trust was that low in an agency, the agency wouldn't be capable of functioning. So trust in each other, trust in the institution, and one that we don't much talk about, but that John Lewis was incredibly articulate about when he talks about what the civil rights movement was facing in this country. Despite the fact that the government had broken faith with the Black community time and time and time again, throughout the civil rights movement, African Americans kept faith, a belief, a trust in the potential of the system to be changed. And at least in my lifetime, we're the lowest level we've ever been in the United States of America about our belief that we actually can change the system that we're living in. So to me, the greatest gift to me ever of working on the National Performance Review was interacting literally with thousands of federal managers. Joe, you said this sometime earlier. People are called to serve in these roles. And I think at this particular time in our country, in our democracy, federal managers need to be thinking about trust in all three of these arenas, and to be thinking about what can I do to impact trust, not just the public's trust in the services my agency is providing, but of how we work with each other in my neighborhood, of whether I can do things that reestablish people's belief that we've been in bad places before and we can get out of this again. As John Lewis said, it's time to speak up. It's time to get in the way. It's time to do some good trouble.
Right. Very, very good insights. Thank you all. So last question. So you've been patiently speaking with us for over an hour now. So your reward is you have a magic wand to make one administrative or policy change to address these issues. And so I'd love to know what it would be. So Inez, I'll start with you.
Okay, I have a very unpopular thing that I would say here. I think we need to increase salaries of government employees so that they are competitive to industry, so that we can keep them in government service, and not when we're building them up and we're giving them those competencies, we're training them to do better, and that they're not constantly running into those barriers, and then they're pulled away and they're leaving the sector. And that really breaks my heart, because we need those really good people in government.
Okay, great. Yeah, be able to help retain the people that we have that are so good. Carolyn, your magic wand.
Well, I don't think this will surprise anybody who knows me, but the progress that has been made in our discussion today of the use of human-centered design and the way we've shifted to government customer service, the experience, I hope my challenge to public administrators who take these same tools, this same commitment, and start applying them to the way you engage the public on the policies of the agencies. Mm-hmm. Federal governments in Europe are a decade ahead of us in this. And in this country, people want to influence policy, not just service.
Right. Got it. Martha, your thoughts?
This won't surprise anybody either. I think we need a national chief customer experience officer that actually works with chief customer officers, chief customer experience officers across the government, creates a council so that they can share best practices, and, you know, pays attention to the service levels that we provide to each agency's customers.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. We had some very good, we concluded on very practical things that could be done, or things that could be done. Hopefully we can do those. And I really appreciate this great conversation today. I feel like I could continue and chat with you all much longer, but I really thank you so much. And I thank our participants for being here and being engaged with us. So with that, I think I will turn it back over to Ed DeSev, who's our coordinator for the Agile Government Center, for any closing remarks that you may have, Ed.
But before you give it to him, thank you for great moderation, Joe.
Oh, thank you. No, that I have the easy job. I just ask the questions. I don't have to have the answers. So that's what I like about moderation. Ed, over to you.
Joe, thank you. And thank our three panelists today. The richness of what they just did and the amount of benefit that could be derived by governments around the world from listening to this. Believe it or not, I'm doing a little bit of work through OECD with the Saudi government. And the Saudi government is extremely interested in customer experience, Martha. You would be amazed. They realize that even
You're not going to send me to Saudi Arabia, are you?
No, Martha, we're not. We're going to have them come here. Now, the importance, even in a government that's in a closed society and has autocratic characteristics, the importance of providing good service to customers by enhancing the customer experience is well recognized. Carolyn, if we can't do what you just said and bring people into discussions about how to shape public policy, we're in serious trouble. And we've moved to a point where they're going to begin to demand that. If they can go on Facebook, if they can go on Twitter and express their opinions, they want to talk to their government the same way. And we want to see that happen. And I didn't leave human-centered design to last on purpose, but the idea that we can, in fact, shape the way programs work, make them more efficient, and Sukumar asked, what's our incentive? Our incentive is to be highly regarded by the public, highly trusted by the public, because we've done things the right way. Anyone who can't say, gee whiz, I'm really pleased that people think I'm doing a good job, that's the reward in and of itself. I've spent 2.5 years now trying to kick off the Agile government movement, and I'm not about to stop anytime soon. So having the support of the people here in this group, not just the panel, but the people who are out there. I'm looking right now at Paul Verkyle, who has been a tremendous supporter of our activities. He just happens to be right in my line. Paul, you're just in my line of sight. And without people like you, people like the people in this group, and I know quite a few of you, we couldn't do what we're going to try to do. So please stay with us. Please continue to join us for the quarterly meetings. Send stories. Send stories. If you want to send them to James on the website, I think James Higgins has a place to collect them. Joe, back to you, and we're on time and on budget.
Great, thank you. And thanks everybody again. This has been an excellent conversation. As Ed said, we cannot do it without you. So thank you much. We will close this quarterly meeting, and please be awaiting our announcement for our next meeting, which will be sometime in December. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.